The SNC-Lavalin controversy is now in its 6th week, and it could be another dramatic one. Tomorrow, the House of Commons Ethics Committee must decide whether to pick up where the Justice Committee left off and dig deeper into what happened. Former Attorney General Jody-Wilson-Raybould, you'll remember, accused people in the Prime Minister's office of inappropriately pressuring her to intervene in a criminal case against construction and engineering giant SNC-Lavalin. The Conservatives plan to present a motion that asks the Prime Minister to waive all remaining constraints preventing Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott, that's the other cabinet minister who resigned in light of all of this, from talking. Today, though, Justin Trudeau said Canadians have heard enough.
We moved forward as a government and granted an unprecedented waiver, which allowed a full testimony on the matter at hand. A waiver of not just cabinet confidentiality, but solicitor-client privilege as well, to make sure that the Justice Committee could hear a full airing of everything in regards to the former Attorney General's time as Attorney General and possible pressures she was under around Lavalin.
For more on the latest developments in this story, I'm joined by the CBC's Hannah Thibodeau. Hi, Hannah.
Hey, Vashi.
Nice to see you. Thanks for doing this. So what is the latest?
Okay, there's a lot in the latest today. It kept unraveling all day. So the first thing is, at that press conference today, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau mentioned that he had a conversation with Jody-Wilson-Raybould last Monday. It was like, wait a minute, he didn't go any further on that. Prime Minister's office did confirm that they had a meeting in his office last Monday, and it was to talk about the next steps. That's what he said, the next steps. And it was before the media reported what was going to happen. So on Monday, remember what happened? It was the clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Warnock, stepped down, but also they appointed Anne McClellan to review the connections that Cabinet has with the Attorney General, and also to look at whether the Attorney General and the Justice Minister, those jobs should be split. Now, they at the Ethics Committee say they still want to have a conversation with Jody-Wilson-Raybould as well as Jane Philpott. They say, and they've been saying this, they need to have those restrictions lifted because there's much more for Canadians to hear. What that is, we're not sure, but at the Ethics Committee, we know they're going to put that motion forward, not only to lift the restrictions, they want Jody-Wilson-Raybould as well as Jane Philpott to testify before April 5th, and they want to be able to table their findings in Parliament. So it could potentially happen, but again, it's a Liberal-dominated committee.
Yeah, we're going to talk to MPs in a few minutes
I'll
about
be
that and
to
see
hear
what they have
to
to say. But there's also something that landed in our inbox not long ago, and that is a clarification statement from SNC-Lavalin.
Okay, and I'm going back to your show last week because you had the CEO on the show,
Radio Canada. We played their interview, yeah.
And what he was asked, it was, did you say there would be a number of job losses to the PMO, so to the Prime Minister's office? Mr. Bruce's response, no, we never gave a number. Well, this gave ammunition to the opposition. We even heard Andrew Scheer, the Conservative leader today, talking about the fact that the Prime Minister was using the fact that there could be potential job losses at SNC-Lavalin if it didn't get the deferred prosecution agreement as a reason why it kept coming up, because he wanted to save jobs. But that led everybody to believe, hold on a second, they never even brought up the issue of job losses. Now, a clarification just in our inboxes before we came onto the show. I'll just read a bit of it. To clarify, Mr. Bruce indeed stated the Government of Canada was never threatened by SNC-Lavalin. However, the company had made it very clear to the government through its advocacy campaign, and we know that happened with all of the different meetings, that the implementation of a deferred prosecution agreement was the best way to protect and grow the almost 9,000 direct Canadian SNC-Lavalin jobs. So really, that's a pretty big clarification there.
It is.
And we'll pull away some of that ammunition that the opposition are using on the Prime Minister at this time.
It was also interesting at the end, if the RA, the remediation agreement, is not available to SNC-Lavalin, the company will continue to vigorously pursue a path that allows it to move forward and defend its innocent employees to the fullest as it moves forward through the Canadian court system if the RA is not available, which signals to me that they think that it possibly still could be, right?
Yes.
Which, of course, we know that the new Attorney General is something that he's considering.
Ruled out.
Yeah. So next item on the SNC list is that the Canadian Press has an interesting report out today as well.
Yes, they do. This is by Joan Bryden. And what this report says is that there seemed to have been a rift between Jody-Wilson-Raybould and the Prime Minister before the SNC-Lavalin affair. So what that implies is that, remember when she was moved to Veterans Affairs, and in the testimony she said she was moved out of the position of Attorney General and Justice Minister because of the SNC-Lavalin affair. Well, this kind of puts some doubt in that, and I'll go through it. It's a little bit complicated. So what the CP story is citing is that she wanted a conservative Supreme Court justice appointed, and not only appointed to the Supreme Court of Manitoba, from Manitoba, but also made the Chief Justice. Now, CP reports that she recommended this to Justin Trudeau, that he nominate this person. And then this was because in 2017, Beverly McLaughlin, the Chief Justice of the time, was stepping down. She was retiring in December, and Trudeau implemented an advisory panel, an independent advisory panel. It was headed by Kim Campbell, the former Progressive Conservative Prime Minister. They came out with a list of about 3 people. On that list was a gentleman named Glenn Joyal. He was appointed to the Manitoba Chief Justice Court of Queen's Bench in Manitoba in 2011 by Stephen Harper. He also was, they say that he was, views on the charter have been very critical, and he also criticized some of the justices for taking impressions of the charter that helped them move forward their agenda rather than using the legislative agenda from different legislatures. So it was questioning the charter. So when Trudeau looked into this, he said, no, I'm not going to choose this person, I'm choosing someone else, and rejected it. And that is said to have caused an initial rift between the two. So it's putting that in people's heads, well, maybe it wasn't the SNC-Lavalin affair that moved her over to Veterans Affairs.
That's prompted some debate, of course, because on Twitter, because people are saying, oh, are you trying to say that this wasn't just because of Scott Bryson? And others are saying, hey, there was other reporting before that said that they had rifts around judicial appointments. So more debate on the issue. And I know you reached out to Ms. Wilson-Raybould.
I reached out to Ms. Wilson-Raybould. She did respond. She said this is normal conversations that justice ministers and attorney generals would have with the Prime Minister. Take a look at what she had to say. There was no conflict. So she says there was no rift between the two. The ultimate decision on an appointment to the Supreme Court of Canada is always the Prime Minister's. In this process, there are typically confidential conversations and communications back and forth with the PM and the Minister of Justice and Attorney General on potential candidates for appointment. She also goes on to say that this is concerning that this has been leaked. This type of stuff is rarely leaked. And she says that in her note, she goes on to say she can't comment on the veracity, but it could compromise the integrity of the appointments process, our institutions, and potentially sitting justices. So kind of diminishing maybe the role of the person who got the job in the end.
All right. Thank you, Hannah, for that very fulsome and full update. Appreciate it. That's the CBC's Hannah Thibodeau. So what do the Liberals plan to do when the Ethics Committee meets over the SNC-Lavalin controversy tomorrow? And what will the opposition do next if a Conservative motion to probe the matter is rejected? Francis Durand is an Ontario Liberal MP, Pierre Poilievre is the Conservative finance critic, and Daniel Blakey is the NDP's deputy ethics critic. Hello to all 3 of you. Thanks for joining us. I appreciate it. Mr. Durand, let me start with you. A number of your colleagues over the weekend said that the place for Jody-Wilson, and Jane Philpott to tell the rest of their story is within Parliament. Do you support the call for them to appear, or for specifically Jody-Wilson to appear before the Ethics Committee?
Well, we have to put things into context. She's already appeared in front of the committee. She's testified for 4 hours, and the Ethics Committee will decide tomorrow. I'm not going to be there. But Ms. Wilson-Raybould also has other options to present in front of the House of Commons anytime she wants. Any member of Parliament can stand up, and it's up to the Speaker. It's not up to the party to decide that. The Speaker can recognize any member of Parliament.
But it's difficult, though. We had Rob Walsh, for example, on last week, who was the former law clerk of the House of Commons, and he said, yes, they can stand up in Parliament, they can stand up in the House. It's very difficult to speak for longer than a minute. So really, do they have many other options besides appearing before the Ethics Committee?
They can submit any witness testimony. I mean, I think Ms. Wilson-Raybould this last week submitted some written testimony to the Justice Committee.
She said she was going to, but that's different. That's different than being able to speak.
Well,
at
committees
length, right?
committees take seriously any witness testimony, whether it's written or oral. I mean, it has the same weight. It's very serious. And Ms. Wilson-Raybould had 5 weeks to do anything she wanted to do with the Justice Committee. And tomorrow we'll see.
That's not exactly fair.
Ethics.
I mean, you were responsible for actually shutting down the inquiry into Ms. Wilson-Raybould
after she appeared for 4 hours, right?
3.5 hours, to be fair. But she said she was willing to come again, and Liberals voted against that happening.
Yeah, well, we've heard that the rule of law is intact. We've heard that there was nothing illegal was committed, and we heard that the Prime Minister did not direct the former Attorney General to do anything.
Mr. Poilievre, what will Jody-Wilson-Raybould appearing before the Ethics Committee actually accomplish? And I ask because the waiver that was extended to her through an order in council specifically says it was for the purposes of the hearings before the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights and the examination by the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. Even if the committee does vote to hear from Jody-Wilson-Raybould again, do we know she'll actually be able to say anything?
That's up to Justin Trudeau.
Okay, but what is the purpose then of, I mean, if you know that you need him to decide that, what is the purpose of inviting her to appear before the Ethics Committee? Like, are you actually in search of more testimony? Because how would you be able to ascertain that?
We are in search of more testimony. We're inviting her to come back and complete her unfinished testimony. She was not allowed to testify about anything that happened after she was removed as Attorney General. And we know during that following period, she saw things that were so egregious that caused her to resign. She wants to share the reasons why she resigned, reasons we don't know yet. So tomorrow, Justin Trudeau has two simple options. Option one is to allow her to do that, to get to the truth. And option two is to cover it up again.
Do you believe that she actually needs the waiver to stand up, for example, before the Ethics Committee and talk about that period after which she was moved out of the role of Attorney General? Because that same expert, Rob Walsh, said, no, she can speak freely before committee and she would not be punished for it.
Listen, I'm not going to get all entangled in a bunch of procedural mumbo-jumbo. It's really simple. If Trudeau wants her to be able to speak, he'll send her a quick letter saying she has the right to speak about any matters related to SNC-Lavalin, and he'll direct his members to vote in favor of the study. So it just comes down to whether or not he wants the truth out or he wants to continue to cover up.
Does it just come down to that, Mr. Blakey, or is it possible that if she were to be called before the Ethics Committee, being covered by parliamentary privilege, Jody-Wilson-Raybould should be able to talk about any period of time?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is obviously the subject of controversy, and you've done some work on your show to kind of, point out that there's varying opinions. What we do know for sure is that Jody-Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott are obviously of the view, and I'm sure they've received legal opinions on this themselves, that they aren't convinced 100% that they can go out and do that. And so I think if the government wants the story to come out, and we're in this odd position where they say, well, they could go out and say whatever they want, but we're not going to extend the waiver. If the government is comfortable with them saying what they need to say because they know they haven't done anything wrong, and they're of the view they can say it anyway, then I don't know why they wouldn't just extend the waiver, remove all doubt from the minds of Jane Philpott and Jody-Wilson-Raybould that they can say those things, and then let them speak. And they say they can get up in Parliament any time and they can talk about it whenever they want. We all know that that isn't true. And if they were serious about that, then they should be engaging with the parties in order to set aside some time. So what do they mean? Do they mean, and this is where we get into some of those procedural things, I mean, do they mean that we could call a meeting of the Committee of the Whole? Like, there's all sorts of things we could do, but without the cooperation of the government, you can't really get those things done. So the idea that just somehow, as an independent member, they're going to get up and have the time in the House to be able to speak to these things, I think everybody knows is a farce. So I'm frustrated, frankly, by this line. I mean, if it is covered by parliamentary privilege, it should be no problem. But the other thing is that, and I think it's important to take this part seriously, we've heard this from Jane Philpott, they took an oath. So is it the position of these Liberals who say they could get up in Parliament any time? They took an oath to secrecy. Do we really think that the oath of cabinet secrecy is so light that anybody at any time could just get up and disavow it? Usually when you take an oath...
Imagine you were on the other end, right? Imagine that was your caucus and you're hearing these like, I have things to say, but I'm not going to say it. I think that it appears that they're saying, well, if you have things to say, just say it. Like,
well, then they should be released from their oath. And that's what the waiver is about. So the Prime Minister should release them from their oath so that they're not in a position.
And we're
not in a position of devaluing the waiver.
Isn't that a fair point, though, Mr. Duran? Like, if it's true that they should be able to just get up there and say anything they want, why not take the preemptive step of just extending that waiver?
If a member of Parliament can stand up and talk about a chocolate bar in the House of Commons, then surely to God, any member of Parliament can stand up and talk about serious issues.
Except for that chocolate bar speech was a minute.
This Prime Minister has, well, they've delayed for over an hour with various tactics in the House of Commons, but this Prime Minister has lifted cabinet confidentiality, client solicitor privilege, and the issue at hand is when the former Attorney General was the Attorney General. We're not talking
But that's
after
your
or before.
determination of what the issue is, right? What
That's not
what
what
if
she
Canadians
said.
have
The issue-
questions about why she resigned?
But the issue at hand is whether or not there was pressure on the Attorney General, and we've recognized that. The Prime Minister's recognized that, and that's why, for the first time in the long history that I don't recall, I mean, Mr. Poilievre's cabinet and his government tried to muzzle scientists. We haven't done that. We said we were going to lift cabinet confidentiality on the former Attorney General, and anybody can speak to that issue, and they have for 5 weeks at the Justice
What will
Committee.
it hurt then to just extend it? If you're insisting that nothing bad happened, nothing untoward happened, which your government has done, right? What is the harm? And I take your point that they could stand up, and there is that debate raging. But then, what is the harm of just extending the waiver?
But what's the point of extending the waiver if it's already been, if anybody can talk about...
I feel like I'm in a meta talk.
If anybody can discuss what happened before the January 14th, this is the important date. All the testimony at the Justice Committee is before January 14th. We've heard that the rule of law is intact. We've heard that nothing criminal has happened. And we've heard that the Prime Minister did not direct the former Attorney General. So I will defer to my colleagues. What is it that they're trying to do other than extend this for political conveniency to make a story out of it?
Get the truth. I have the testimony here. Lisa Raitt asks Jody-Wilson-Raybould, can you tell us why you resigned from cabinet? Jody-Wilson-Raybould, I cannot. She had to say that multiple times because the waiver didn't extend to the period after she was moved out as Attorney General. It's really simple. Judy Scrow, a member of the Liberal caucus, said it's time for both Philpott and Wilson-Raybould to put up or shut up. They're ready. They just need a place to do it and permission to do so. Now, it's up to Trudeau tomorrow, putting aside all this mumbo-jumbo, it's up to Trudeau tomorrow whether he's going to have his committee members who have a majority invite them to come back and give them permission to speak about the whole truth. That is the only issue that we're resolving tomorrow.
Mr. Blakey, does Mr. Durand have a point, though, that the issue that was at hand was whether or not there was political interference when she was Attorney General? Is it germane to the issue that we find out what happened after she left her post as Attorney General?
Well, look, I think it's perfectly plausible that somebody who was faced with some pressure found something out and thought, okay, maybe this is a normal part of the job, maybe this is just, you know, what happens, but I'm the decision maker, and so I'm going to make my decision and I'm going to suffer the consequences. That person was Jody-Wilson-Raybould. Subsequently, she was fired. I think it's totally plausible that after her firing as Attorney General, in the period that she was still in cabinet, she found something out. Somebody said something to her that cast all of those former events in a different light for her. I would love for her to be able to let us know. Maybe that's true, maybe it isn't. I think she does have more to say because she said as much. She said as much as at committee. Jane Philpott has said that there's more to say. The only reason we're having all these conversations about could they do it here, could they do it there, what would be the risk if they did it here, what would be the risk if we did it there, is because the Prime Minister refuses to say, go ahead, tell your story, there won't be any consequences, you're relieved of your oath, and here's an appropriate forum to do it. That's the only reason we're having all these conversations. And so if the Prime Minister would simply relieve them of that obligation, then we would find a place for them to tell their story. In fact, if the waiver were extended, they could do it at a press conference and you could ask questions, not just parliamentarians. So there's a very easy way to get to the bottom of the story that these women want to tell, and that involves the Prime Minister giving them permission to tell the story of what happened.
All right, I'm out of time, but we'll be watching the committee tomorrow. Thank you very much for all your time this afternoon. Thanks to Francis Durand, Pierre Poilievre, and Daniel Blakey.
Thank you.